If you look at even the headlines of January 2024, it was the cost of living is hurting Kenyans. That's January 2024. But when you see the politicking that was happening around the same time, it wasn't speaking to the cost of living. It wasn't speaking to healthcare. It wasn't speaking to education and all the places that hurt Kenyans, the economy. It wasn't speaking to that. So June 2024 it wasn't about if it was going to happen. It was just a matter of when. We were definitely heading there.
Hi everyone and welcome to Fanya Mambo Africa. Super excited to host two amazing people today. One is a lawyer, the other one is a comms expert. I would have wanted to introduce them, but because I want them to feel nice and warm on this episode, I will let them introduce themselves. Also, one of them has a name that's a tongue twister and I don't mess that up, so I'm just being nice. But they say, ladies first.
All right.
So here we go.
Asante sana, Sarah, for having us. My name is Diana Ngao. I am a communications and marketing specialist, and I specialize in crisis communications and reputation management. And I'm also a podcaster.
Crisis communication expert. Where?
Yeah.
I think Kenya needs such at the moment.
Yeah, many crises
Many
happening at the same time.
You know?
Yeah.
But it's also good. I mean, they're also podcasters, and by the end of this, you will know their podcast and you can subscribe, just as you subscribed here. They're amazing people and political commentators on the site.
Yeah.
Yes, gentlemen.
Yes.
Tell them your beautiful name.
Asante sana for having us here. It's a great pleasure and privilege. Kwa majina, naitwa Chaka Sichangi, aka the Bishop.
Oh, yes.
Wananitanga hivyo.
Yes.
Sababu napenda Yesu, not that I'm an actual bishop. Just a nickname.
And he quotes the Bible like
the Constitution.
Yeah.
I consider myself a multidisciplinary professional. I am a lawyer and advocate of the High Court, a strategic communications consultant, and a political analyst.
Great. Hey, these guys have big titles. I love it for them. And the most beautiful one is a quick one, wakili.
Yes.
In this Kenya, you can't just be one thing. Everybody is doing multiple things.
You need to, because that's the only way of surviving.
Yeah.
So it's good to have you here, guys. And the thing they did not tell us, which I will tell you, is that both of them work for people. They work in the political space. That's why they are here. Two, they work for and with politicians, like big politicians. Diana, you can tell them who you work with or for.
I could say I've had experience working with politicians, and my experience started in around 2020, where I started working with Honorable Martha Karua, and then leading out to 2022, went under the umbrella of Azimio, so I had the experience of also working with the Raila Odinga team and under the principal Honorable Raila Odinga. And shortly after, Governor Abdul Somad, I was his director of Governor's Press, which is director communication. So yeah, it's been a few years. It looks like it's long, but it's been a few years working.
5 years is a long time in Kenya.
Yeah, working in the political space, it's been very interesting. It has very interesting because communications for them, especially because they need to communicate with their audience consistently. And it is seen as a personal brand first. You know, our politics is more of personalities.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting space.
Okay.
Yeah.
So by the end of this, for people who want to work with and for politicians, I'm sure you will get a few nuggets that you can use for that space. Chaka. Let's go with that one. I was looking for the second name, then it went. Sichangi. Who have you been working with, and how would you describe that experience?
It's a very interesting question because I've never really had to answer it in short form.
Stories ni mingi.
Because it's not something I have tabled before. I had the opportunity, so mine is not as direct. I had the opportunity to enter political consulting through a consulting company that was in security consulting and political consulting. And so I was working for the technical advisor, a technical assistant to President Uhuru Kenyatta. So it wasn't directly for President Uhuru Kenyatta, but I was working for his technical assistant, Professor Mutahi Ngunyi.
Interesting.
Yes, I get interesting views because he's a very interesting man. So I worked for him. Actually, in many ways, I learned quite a lot about political and policy analysis under him. And so it was a great privilege to see things from that lens. I learned a lot. And through that opportunity, I then, because this was during the second term of President Uhuru Kenyatta, and we are all aware about the handshake. So through a series of collaborations with the Presidential Secretariat for Right Honorable Raila Odinga, I got seconded there, and then for the last year and a half leading up to the 2022 elections, I was now stationed at the Presidential Secretariat, therefore working for Right Honorable Raila Odinga as an Assistant Director in Strategic Communications. But I've also had the good fortune to consult for other notable figures, working very closely with Madam Diana. She's given me a lot of access to her networks as well.
And actually, Chaka and I met during that period of consulting for under the Presidential Secretariat for Azimio campaign. Okay. Yeah.
Interesting. So, of course, I have an understanding of how that space works, but for the sake of our viewers, I'm sure many of them, when they hear I was in the technical committee, I am the strategic director of comms, what is this exactly that is technical about being in the technical comms for, say, Uhuru Kenyatta? What's that about?
Yeah, it's interesting. Madam Diana is always trying to get me to talk about this, and I'm usually hesitant or reluctant. But I will rely on at least what the professor has shared in public, because that's when you're talking about him being a technical assistant. So relying on what he shared in public, there is a lot that goes on that the public is not usually aware of. So the presidency is such a huge institution. There are people who work for the president who don't even know each other or never get to interact. It's a huge institution. And you can imagine for this institution having to have the pulse of the nation at any given moment, knowing what is happening across the country. That is a lot of information and knowledge to process and to make sense of. And you cannot process it the way you read the news, right? You need protocols, methods, tools of analysis in order to quickly synthesize that information so that you can make decisions, because you're not just knowing kuambiwa and then you just wake up and make a pronouncement on the road, because there are a lot of things to balance. And each decision you make, whichever way you make it, it will have implications, both positive and negative.
You want to tell me these things politicians make on top of cars are well thought out? I mean, you said you don't make declarations.
By the time they are announcing that, there's a whole machinery that has gone into it. Sometimes they will make a pronouncement, but then for that pronouncement to be realized, there's still a lot that has to be done. Because, for instance, let's say you're making a declaration, hypothetically, that a road needs to be made, right, or fixed because where you are, the local people insisted, right? Now, if there wasn't a budget for that road that had been, because the budgets are made well ahead of time, right? And remember, there are different roads institutions. So what classification of road is that? What budgetary provisions were there? If there's no budgetary provision, where will it be gotten from? Will there be adjustments and the like? So either way, whether it's before the decision, because some of the announcements are made on the confidence that certain things have already been considered. So even when now there's an extensive announcement that this road will link to this place, to that place, to that place, a lot of work has already gone into that. So now in terms of being a technical assistant, you have all these state ministries, departments, and agencies, and there's a lot of that data. It has, so the unit that he was heading and which he developed was a data aggregation and analysis unit, so that you could make sense of that. It was voluminous data, and people know him for what he says on the screen and his controversial pronouncements, but there's actually a lot of technical work
behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Then he spoke about crisis communication.
Yeah.
And he gave a very good example of having a road.
Yeah.
There's a time President Ruto, just in December, somewhere in Kayole, and promised that by the time you come back in January,
There'll be a road.
there will be a road. The other day, the road from Kotulo, Ramu, Ikuje, how are you sorting this crisis? Because even as we speak, that road in Kayole is undone. And the promise was for January. So as a crisis communication expert.
Well, I can't speak in terms of President William Ruto's team. I'll speak from a very subjective view from looking outside, not from the inside. But from the outside looking in, it seems I actually feel very sympathetic to his communications team, because there are very many fires they have to put out. Why? Because as to what Chaka was talking about in terms of there's so much work that goes into this, unfortunately, in my opinion, I feel like the pronouncements of the president, he goes ahead of his team, ahead of the technical team. And at this point now, he may be just saying things to appease the audiences there. And then now the team has to work behind. It's like saying something that now have to work backwards to correct it. So it's actually a lot of crises at the same time, and some of them are not even comms crises, they're technical crises, because now these agencies need to work together and say, oh, do we have the budget? Oh, was it in this financial year? And all these things. So I don't it is a crisis. I feel very sympathetic to his communications team and advisors, because I'm sure since 2022, when he was sworn in, they have been in crisis mode throughout.
Yeah, but just for clarification, I was talking about Uhuru's second term.
No, I understand. The example was for people to understand what's ideally behind the scene it means when you work for a politician sometimes. Because, politics...
And it does happen, because you see, these politicians are human, and sometimes they get carried away on the moment, and they may make some pronouncements that may not really be accurate to what the information that they have been briefed or the plans that have been made. Sometimes that does happen, and it's humans are prone to error, and sometimes we can be carried away by the crowd and whatever the feeling is. It's human, and it's different. That's why I'm saying political communication is a bit different from corporate communications, that you're communicating as a corporate. Here now, at the end of the day, it's an individual who's communicating for a whole institution, a whole government, and is seen as the head. So it's really, and not just the president, even MPs may sleep, even governors may sleep. But that is the idea in terms of crisis communications, or rather that's where I have honed my skills in supporting political figures in managing crises like that.
So when you work in the political space, sometimes these things are made and you very well know that is a lie. Like... let's say, let me give an example, because you work with Martha a lot. this is an example, by the way, it has nothing, don't judge me.
Yeah, okay.
So let's say she comes and makes a promise, and you very well know that is a lie. And so my work, or your work, will be to come and counter that to the public, convincing them that lie is the truth.
Yes, that's true.
What does it mean that you guys are the ones who come and lie to us, and then we have to keep fighting you, telling you we know that is not a fact? You just have to go with it because your boss said.
I think that's where accountability comes in. Because you see, when some of these statements are made, in retrospect, when you see, for instance, when it's being said it's a lie, it presupposes that there was malice or ill intention. Remember, these individuals, being humans, are not repositories of perfect knowledge and information. They're also relying on, they have several people who have access to them, they send them things, and we live in an age of information, and there's voluminous information which is coming out quickly and rapidly. So by the time you fact check and look into it, and sometimes even when you've put certain measures, something can, even a typo can, really change how something is completely understood. And those measures of accountability are good, and it's a constitutional mandate even for citizens to keep their leaders accountable. So it's a good check and balance, because however well-intentioned the leader may be, that accountability measure now comes and helps correct course. The unfortunate thing is if we always presuppose that it was malicious and ill-intentioned.
Yeah. And also, just to add on that, I'd also like to say that when it comes to political communications and deciding who to work for, because I mean, you can be given the opportunity, and when you're given the opportunity, you can also decide. So I think for my small experience, those 5 years, it's also more important for you to decide who you're going to work for and the kind of candidate you're going to work for. So if you're going to work for a candidate who is known for just speaking without any facts, that always keeps you on crisis mode, then that makes your work even harder, and it also taints your reputation, because now you can get to points like what you're saying, that a candidate has said, you know what, by tomorrow, this building will be up. And then now you have to meet the media and the general public to actually now say, like, yeah, it's true what he said. Exactly. So the thing with political communication is what also Chaka said, there has to be accountability. And the most important thing for crisis communications, there are 3 things. It's tell it all, tell it fast, and keep saying it.
Repeat until it looks like the truth.
Repeat. No, not until it's. I said tell it all, meaning tell the truth, be accountable and transparent about it, and tell it fast. Be the first person to actually course correct, right? And then repeat, because at some point you also have adversaries. This is a political space. You also have adversaries who will try and use what you've said, even though you're correcting yourself, to maybe detract you and malign you. So you have to keep repeating it and repeating. And they are prone to error. But then I'm also saying that it's not always all politicians that may have, like what Chaka said, that may have facts. And sometimes may miss. But there's also another side, that there are some politicians who are known, like, personality. It's like there are some brands that are known to be very transparent, and there are some brands that are known to be like, exactly. So it's about, or rather in our line of work, it's very important to make the decision on who you're going to work with. It's not just everyone.
It's very easy when you say that, until whoever you choose to work for jumps ship or builds a coalition. And now you're in between. So at that point, do you really have a choice? Because let's say today I've made a choice to work for Okia Omtata. Random name again. And then I'm here believing Okia has the best interests at heart of this country, blah, 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 blah. And then December, he jumps ship and says he wants to work with Matiang'i. And probably I personally didn't believe in Matiang'i's way of. So at that point, what happens? You can see, he's like, why are you putting me in this? What happens in such scenarios?
I think there's a lot that can be said about that, and there are a number of things to consider. Number one, you see, first of all, let's start with the basic premise that politics is about interests, right? And part of the disconnect in our politics is that often we make it so much about the personalities, right? So it's about interests. And so if interests align, you may then end up working with someone who previously you didn't anticipate that you'd be working together for the purposes of the interest that you're trying to advance. And those interests, just to clarify, need not, again, the presupposition is that those interests are personal. Those interests could be interests in terms of advancing certain agendas. Secondly, if you're working for this person, let's say you've given the example of Okiya Mtata, and you have agreed to come in under the leadership of this person, and this person has a certain vision for this country. If they then see that it is prudent that for a time they work with this other person, and you have chosen to come under that person's leadership, it doesn't mean that you're obliged to work with them, but it's only fair that you consider that if you are relying on this person's wisdom, then there's probably something that they've seen, which you may not yet have seen. Then finally, sorry?
No.
I think that then dilutes the issue, because now you see we're then speaking to the character of people, because even when you now talk about a check, usually that's based on innuendo and rumor. Have we seen a situation where somebody is in public anapatiwa check and then muna shake hands, now let's work together?
Would it ever be public?
But you see, that's what I'm saying. Have all coalitions in the past been about checks? Because if you look at, for instance, major surprising shifts, whether you look at the famous handshake, and what was able to be achieved after that. If you look at now this broad-based government, and people have a lot of thoughts on it, again, we can say that there are certain things that are being achieved in that respect. Finally, let me also say that at the end of the day, we may try and interpret things through idealisms and utopias, but we are all Kenyans living in this Kenya. So even if you disagree with a person, that person is still a Kenyan, right? So they are not an angel sent from heaven, and neither are you. So it may well be worth it to see if working with this person advances the interests of the country. Then my personal view should not be the priority or what is taking center stage.
Yes, and just to jump onto that, I would answer this to also think about when we're working in a work setup. Sometimes we don't always understand the direction in which our bosses may take, but because you joined this company and you like working there, or you like the projects working there, sometimes they may have bigger vision. And I have an actual specific example with that. When I started working for Martha Karua, is around the time when BBI was an agenda that was being pushed. And Honorable Raila Odinga was on the BBI side, or a proponent pushing BBI. And Honorable Martha Karua was on this side for Linda Katiba. And a year down the line, or a year and a few months down the line, I remember it was March 2022, where Kenya signs to Azimio. And I remember struggling a bit in my mind, because I mean, we crafted all these communications around Linda Katiba, and even about now we called Uhuru and Raila BBI brothers, and then now come the general election race, Martha decides to go with, or rather, it's not Martha, it was actually a party decision. The party decides to go with Martha, with Azimio, and then at the same time, Azimio is also looking for a running mate. Actually, not just Azimio, even Kenya Kwanza was looking for a running mate at that time. And she becomes the candidate to be the running mate. So now my job is not just Honorable Martha Karua, it's also
the person you had been
BBI brothers. You're right. Yeah. But speaking to what now Chaka said, is that there was an agenda, and Martha has always had an agenda for Kenya. If you look at her track record and the things she says, she's been consistent. So there was an agenda, and I had to remove my personal ideas or beliefs about Honorable Raila Odinga and seeing it away from what I'm thinking and seeing for the good of this country, I believe that now this leadership, compared to what the other alternatives, would give us a better stand as a Kenyan now. Now I'm not talking as a communicator working for Martha. I give myself that talk of, as a Kenyan, what do I want? Because the decision I'm making or me supporting this candidate actually also has a ripple effect in the country. So I feel like if we look at it in terms of individualism, we also get trapped into that whole thing that we keep saying in our politics, that it's very personality based when it should be issue based. So as political communicators, even when your candidate shifts back and forth, I think the guiding thing for you, because you're not locked in that position, perhaps what if Honorable Martha Karua went to the Kenya Kwanza side? I don't know whether I may have continued, but you're not locked to that. You're not locked to that position. You have a choice. You can walk away. The same thing even in corporate and in business. Your company seems to go this direction or make certain mistakes that feel like these are against my principles. People walk away from companies.
They move.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I hope by now the people watching have gotten an idea of what it means to work as a comms person in the political space. And also why people should not be beating people online a lot because they're in those political spaces.
Yeah.
Everyone is looking for, at the end of the day, everyone must feed themselves. So everyone needs to work at the end of the day, bottom line. So now switching gears to the current state of affairs in this country. And I don't know, let's begin in June 2024. The switch that happened, because I believe there was a change in how things run in this country. As people who are in this comm space, do you feel these people that you work with understand the issues that forced the youth to get to the streets?
I want to tackle that and say that I don't think the issue started in June 2024. June 2024 was just
the outburst.
Yeah, the culmination of this. I actually think the people had been speaking, even when we were electioneering in 2022, things were not that good. And then when the new regime came in, things now started nosediving, or rather, things just didn't seem to get good. So already, before we're coming into a general election, we're recovering from COVID. Things are getting good, yes, but they're not as good as it is. Then we have a general election and people are hopeful between which regime will come. But then things don't get better. And then now other politicians appear talking to themselves, and the rest of us are dealing with So I feel like the issues had been boiling. And even we saw it during the Azimio protests, the number of people who came to the streets to join the Azimio protests during the 2023. So the symptoms were there. Were they listening? I don't think so. There was a section of the political class that was listening, and that's why you see that they're on the side of the people and saying the same things, and even raising things that for us we didn't know until when one political figure speaks it out and you're like, oh my gosh, this is what is happening. So I could say the current regime was a bit tone deaf, because if you look at even the headlines of January 2024, it was the cost of living is hurting Kenyans. That's January 2024. But when you see the politicking that was happening around the same time, it wasn't speaking to the cost of living, it wasn't speaking to healthcare, it wasn't speaking to education and all the places that hurt Kenyans, the economy, it wasn't speaking to that. So June 2024 it wasn't about if it was going to happen, it was just a matter of when. We were definitely heading there.
So, Chaka, at the moment, looking back, because now it's been 7-8 months, do these people understand the issues that were raised by Kenyans still?
There's no binary answer for that, yes or no. I think several things are happening at the same time. And I think even in June of 2024, part of the problem was, and this is why communication is so important, it's communication or lack thereof in world history has caused wars even. And I think part of what was happening from a conceptual level is that multiple conversations were happening at the same time. And those conversations were speaking to different interests pulling in different directions. So people were talking at each other. And if people are having different conversations, communication hasn't happened. Right, so then it becomes difficult to understand one another. So I'm coming to current situation. Why I'm starting there is part of what was happening. For instance, to take one line, because we can't unpack everything. Some of the leaders at the time were focused on macroeconomic conversations, talking about, worrying about GDP and debt ratios and the like, and what we need to do to change our form of economics. But as much as you're looking long term into some of the policy shifts that you need to make, and we're seeing some of the effects now, people here are talking about their lived experiences. Yes, if you're talking about GDP growth 3 years from now, but I'm not able to have enough food to get me to next month, what does that mean for me? And those policy issues needed to come to a meeting point such that even as we're looking long term, there was an urgent need for empathy to people's lived experiences and interventions that speak to people's lived experiences. So there have been adjustments. And actually, prior to June 2024, that was part of the tension that was happening, because some of the frustration had you see some of the immediate spikes in cost of living. Not only were taxes being added, for instance, but subsidies were also being removed. Yeah. If you look at the previous regime, just to give a quick comparison, part of the reason those subsidies had been put in place for fuel, for maize, was that even as we look long term, it's to cushion the effect on people. Now, if you have a regime coming in that then quickly overhauls that, because it's mostly focused on those macroeconomic policy issues, then there's a certain blindness to how that it's impacting people day to day, the next day. And now that is when part of the things that started boiling over. So even as far back as late 2022, because some of those changes started happening then. So you come to now this boiling point. So since then, some of the changes that happened, because you see, we're talking about empathy. That means you're now speaking. Empathy is not a policy issue. Yeah. So now their political goodwill comes in. Yeah. So some of the changes that happened in the political space, I believe, recalibrated how things are seen at the top, and which is why it's important to have the face of Kenya, because then you have different perspectives from across the country. And so now you can see policy positions being introduced that factor in various perspectives. And so now you're starting to see certain changes happening, not all at once, as we would ideally like, but there have been changes. And you can see cost of fuel has come down, for instance. You can see, people were talking about how money was being used. You can see that now there's policy shifts in terms of how the budgeting has happened, which will have an impact on the ground, because whereas before the kind of budgeting that was there, for example, was taking the traditional figures that were there and just tweaking them a little bit. Now you have zero-based budgeting. What does that mean? It means that you're focusing on priorities, reducing wastage, so you can focus on essential things, which means urgent things may sooner get addressed than previously. And so when we're interpreting some of the decisions that are being made, it's difficult to see that on a headline, but at some point it does have. I'll give you another example from this recent cabinet meeting. 95% of pending bills, for example, were prioritized to be paid. All pending bills below 10 million by National Treasury. That means people whose businesses had, sometimes even stalled. It's difficult to make progress. Those are people who are employed. Those are families to be fed. That's now cash flow. It's a fiscal injection. So you can see some changes. It's not perfect. It's not ideal, but there's still a lot to be done.
Yeah,
very interesting from a very interesting
Chaka,
perspective on that. I am sure. I mean, people, I think so long as people do not have money in their pockets, that conversation you're saying is very still
high level.
here. If I can't have dinner, whatever you're saying for me as a citizen won't make sense. I think that's the argument. But I would want to just move a bit further on in terms of because comms is the problem. If you don't communicate, that's your problem. So now with considering what he's shared, how are you in the political space going to use communication and transition that to the digital space, because the people we are dealing with now are very tech savvy.
Yeah.
So how are you planning to do, instead of just doing the usual, we were in cabinet, we discussed, blah, 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 done?
Yeah. Well, I like that question, but it's putting me in the headspace of trying to think about as a communication from a government perspective, in terms of
look at it from a political, even if it's Martha today who's not in government, and she has.
I think this is where, as much as Chaka and I we work closely together, but we come from two different schools of thought. And for me, my school of thought is that we've already seen the character of this regime. So even though they're course correcting, which I've gotten from what he's just shared, even though they're course correcting, they've already shown their character that it was driven by their own selfish interests. And now that leads me now to your question in terms of what is different what can they do in the digital space, or any political figure in the digital space. I mean, digital is changing so fast, and now you don't have to have rallies where there are thousands of people. You can hold spaces where you can directly engage the audiences. And the more people feel accessible to you, the more they feel that you're speaking to their issues, the more they resonate with you and your ideologies. So it's a matter of politicians now finding or taking advantage of all these new technological advances to engage audiences based on their ideologies. It's like me selling you my ideology and saying, and this is very hypothetical, I'm not communist, but I'm just going to use this example. If Kenya was to adopt a communist sort of policy, we would all be, all our basic needs would be met, and would be, it wouldn't be so capitalistic that we have such a huge gap, right? So if I was a political figure right now, and this is my ideology, you look at the times. Where are the people? They are on TikTok, they are on X, and they are on YouTube. So taking advantage of all these places to directly speak, because now, unlike then before, you had to go to Uhuru Park to listen or watch mainstream media to listen to a politician. But right now, actually, mainstream media as a medium is actually now being removed the picture, and the politician or the political figure needs to speak directly to the audiences. And the audience can now ask or tweet William Ruto or President William Ruto and ask, why has this not been done, directly to him, and expect the person, whether it's him or the person who's managing, when they respond, they see it as, this is what he has told me. This is what he has said. So there needs to be a shift in thinking that there's a medium between the voter base or the Kenyan population and the political figure. There's no medium now with digital space. It is mimi na wewe hapa.
And we can go.
Yes, exactly. I think the medium is more of the communication now, the other thing that would, apart from now, and once you come to that mindset that it is me and my audiences and this is where they are, and if I want to keep engaging them because everyone is on their phones, the other medium which becomes, I don't want to say secondary, because mainstream media is still important. I don't want to say it's secondary, but they are the ones now who frame the conversations and how you speak and how also the audience is, what are their issues. They're the ones who frame this for you. But then the goodness with what digital media and online media has done, it's democratized the space. Sasa there's no framing at reject finance bill. It's not saying that people are concerned about the finance bill. Guys are saying no, reject, drop that bill.
And even if you invite them, they will say live, you don't want it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that from a comms perspective, political figures or people in the space and who want to even run or govern better need to realize that the medium that used to be there, that thin wall, the medium that used to be there is no longer there, and people want to see the authentic person.
And they can't hide anymore. Because, they used to hide because they're in this air-conditioned V8.
Yeah.
And then you only see them and they disappear.
Yeah, and if you look at even some of the political figures who seem to be doing really well, it is purely we are seeing their authentic self showing up.
That's true.
Yeah.
From that line of thoughts, I would want. The other day we had a rating where I think InfoTrack and Office of the Auditor General gave, I think, the best performing MPs, governors. Of course, we did not even, that list did not surprise me because everyone speaks about Irongo Kangata.
Yeah.
He just posts his work online and moves.
Yeah.
You go to Murang'a, the people love what he's doing.
Yeah.
So even if InfoTrack had put someone else,
Yeah.
the question would have been, aye.
Yeah.
If it's Nairobi, they've put, I don't know, Babu, we know they had Salasia, all these people.
Yeah.
And the people on the ground see their work and talk about it.
Yeah.
How is this rating going to change how people perceive their leaders or even the leaders themselves? Because also, remember, even if you lie to us, assume InfoTrack I was to pay it as an MP to rate me.
Yeah.
The ground
Has the same.
has the data, raw data.
But it's what I am saying about the role of media, and public opinion polling has such a huge impact on how media frames things. So, let's say, and this is very hypothetical. So let's say Babu is rated, Babu we know. Okay, no, that's actually true. Let me give another example. Let's say we say Tim Wanyoni is rated the best performing MP, right, across the world, across the Kenya in the last financial year, or rather in the last 1 year, he's been rated the best MP, right? But when you go to the ground, there are people complaining about Tim. Yeah. However, you have framed, because of now this opinion poll, however they did their polling, it has framed and positioned him as a best performing MP. And it's written, once something is written in mainstream media and reported, it becomes like that is
sort
a
of
fact.
Some gospel truth.
It's a gospel truth. So me, who may have not later on, by the way, later on, not even now, I have not paid attention. But then later on, I see Tim Wanyoni is in the ballot, and I want to know, who is this Tim Wanyoni? What do I see? I Google and I see best performing MP, and I take it as a truth. So that's how I see opinion polling. They kind of frame the nini. I'm not a big fan, by the way, but I see how important and impactful they are. Even to make it even more radical, that gauging for MPs of best performing MPs, it's based on.
It was based on the Auditor General's report.
For CDF?
Yes.
Why do MPs have CDF?
Okay, that's a whole different conversation. I don't want us to go that legal way because it's a thing that has been going on for years. I'm just using a tease. I want to see how different that changes the leadership, not even changes.
Yeah.
How we will perceive leadership as Kenyans who vote, and how these leaders expect to serve the people, if that makes sense.
I think there's actually, let me just, as I finish, I think there's actually a scorecard, because what this opinion polling does is providing a scorecard of how to gauge politicians or elected leaders and their performance. But there's actually a scorecard that is underpinned in the Constitution, which is chapter 10 of the Constitution of our national values. And that is where Kenyans should look at. Is this person integral? Is this person accountable? Is he transparent? How does he use the public resources? That is the scorecard that we need. We don't need a public polling to tell us that Tim Wanyoni or Babu Owino are the best performing MPs, or Gladys Wanga is the best performing in it. That is all PR. I feel like when it comes to the ballot, we actually, the constitution, I feel like, is such a gift to Kenyans that we do not use, because the scorecard is there. If we're able to dissect the constitution and actually come up with not even come up, frame the scorecard in terms of when we're looking for an MCA or when we're looking for an MP, or if we're even trying to audit our current MP, tunaenda hii chapter na tunatumia, tunasema alifanya hivi tick, alifanya hivi tick, alifanya hapana hakufanya, and then come up with a scorecard. But if we leave it to mainstream media and opinion polling, those things can be manipulated.
That I agree. And also it's good to remind people, by the way, if you want to know if your MP is working, Parliament is the basis.
Yeah.
That's where they're supposed to be working from their work. There are 3 roles out there. So I'm sure there are some of them who've never even sponsored a bill, 5 years, 10 years. So if they are not really doing that, then there's no value. Because the day CDF dies, they have nothing to do.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do. What do you think about how the leaders now shift gears from this sort of polls? Not based on CDF though. Don't ignore that part. I know you are a lawyer.
We'll still have to come back to it.
We'll come back to it. But look at that and look at how we, the voters, make choices. Yeah.
It's very difficult to decouple those issues, especially coming from the conversation we're coming from. Because you see, when you're talking about how leaders shift and how voters see them, to a large extent, perception is reality, right? So what is informing this perception? And there's a feedback loop, because leaders are adjusting to what is Kenya ground inasema. And now peer ground is adjusting to how those leaders are responding to those issues. And it's why I'm saying you can't decouple those issues. For instance, when you say that there's a legal argument, even when we've highlighted the 3 roles of parliamentarians, that's a legal issue, but the legal issue is within the context of our norms and cultures. On the one hand, we have certain cultures that are not healthy for country, but they are a comfortable mold through which we understand issues. So we link our MPs with the CDF, right? What relationship is there between an MP and a road? When you look at those 3 roles you've highlighted, the roles are to represent, to oversight, and to legislate. You can oversight a road, but you can't legislate a road into existence, right? So when the people are expecting, and we say a lot about our leaders, but we also have to look at ourselves. When the people are saying, huyu alituletea barabara, ama tunataka utusaidie, and this person is like, okay, I really want to I feel like I can make a change. Kama ni barabara, let me make that commitment. There's an unhealthy relationship here happening between leaders and citizens. And that's why I'm saying it's difficult to decouple from the issue of CDF, because that's the entire controversy surrounding CDF right now. That's why a new act had to be put in place, and why even CDF is on the chopping block, because the whole idea of the Constituency Development Fund is closely to the idea of devolved government, and it's about citizen-led development. CDF is about those committees at the constituency level made up of constituents who are supposed to be now using this allocation of funds to address their most urgent and important needs. So when you then make it inextricably linked to an MP, which is why it was declared unconstitutional in the first place. It speaks to some of the cultural challenges that we're having, and which we might want to conveniently ignore, but there are things we're propagating that then bite us down the road.
Yeah. And that just shows that there's poor civic education for even the masses to, or the rest of us Kenyans, to understand the different roles of these people. Because I think for a very long time, ever since we promulgated the 2010 Constitution, we are not fully aware in terms of the different roles all these different people play. So we are still part in the older Constitution where MP can also be a minister at the same time, and that has now even the power to actually bring that road or that water, So we're still stuck in that mindset. But I mean, it's been what? We're now going into 15 years of the 20, we can't even call it new constitution. Yeah, 2010 Constitution, and yet we're still battling this let me say, false expectations, because you cannot expect an MP to bring you development when that is a role of the devolved government, and the MP is to oversight, legislate, and ensure that nationally your views are represented when we start talking about national policies. So there's just poor voter and general civic education. It should be in the curriculum that people know that an MP, this is their role, so that by the time that person gets a voter's ID, the expectation is now, I want to see you in parliament. I want to see the bills that you have proposed, that in our national collective, it's good also for me from this constituency level.
I think the gap has been there on the education, that I agree. But I feel since that June thing, sort of people have made it their duty to educate people. Yeah. So I think the whole idea of reminding people the roles of an MP are now, every day we're almost singing it every day. By the way, this is what an MP should do. Even when the courts make decisions like those. Everyone comes and discusses, even if the MP goes back and says, Hamtaki Basari, like people can argue, no, we have given you some other job, do it and stick to that. But my other question would be with regards to now following the law. We've seen the other day the High Court that decided to made ruling, not decided, that Azimio is the majority. 2 days, Parliament resumes. And immediately, Speaker Wetangula questions that and says, no, we are an independent body. So what does this mean about as a country with regard to the rule of law, adherence, and also just understanding both parliament and judiciary as institutions that are key for a country?
I'll speak to two issues, and you raised it from a legal perspective. So there's a word you've used there, quashing. There are three kind of orders in this context that a court can give. There's an order of certiorari, which means quashing or invalidating a decision. There's an order of prohibition, which means you're being prevented from doing something. So, for example, koti ikisema usibomoe hiyo nyumba, it's an order of prohibition. And there's an order of mandamus, which obligates you to do something, right? So part of the confusion is arising here. And then on this other side, let's leave one point which we can revisit is the issue of separation of powers, right? So coming back to these three orders, what the court issued was, and this is an objective analysis, I'm not saying who should have done what. What the court issued was an order of certiorari, quashing the decision of Speaker Wetangula in 2022, declaring Kenya Kwanza the majority. But it fell shy of an order of prohibition, saying that you shouldn't now make a subsequent declaration either way. And it didn't issue an order of mandamus saying that this is what you should do. So having quashed that decision with valid reasons, we are now back in a situation where we are not in you can't have a lacuna, you can't have a vacuum, right? So a decision still needs to be made as to who are the majority and who are the minority. And that duty falls to Parliament. And this is where separation of powers comes in. because you'd now be going a very slippery slope if the judiciary is now issuing a directive that is the preserve of parliament. Now, the considerations that went into that decision by parliament, by the speaker, then and now, may be a matter for debate. But that's what is some of the dynamics.
Yeah, I like how you've explained it. And by the way, we've never had this conversation, but I'm hearing how you're explaining from a legal perspective. From a layman's side, how I see that court decision is, it's a little bit too late. Like, the blurriness of the checks and balances have already been so blurred, because from that pronouncement of, what do you call it, of inaitwaje?
The majority.
Of majority in 2022, when Azimio had majority. And then now, to the point of now we're at bread-based, yeah, everything, government, nusumkate government. It has blurred, all these 2 years it's just been blurring the checks and balances of everything, that now how I see it, when this court ruling comes in, I'm like, okay, thanks, but we are in even more mud. We are in quicksand.
I think of how I look at it, I think they're trying to, it would have been best done back then. But you have to set a precedence at some point.
Yeah.
So that we are 2027, we're going in the same. We might be through a similar scenario. So at least when these guys go to court, they will have a case to quote, because they always quote previous rulings.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. But thanks for that legal eye on that. It's that's what I'm saying. It's our civic duty every day to educate ourselves and the people on what happens across. Now, Mount Kenya politics, and this, I think, Diana, you'll go first. For the longest time, we saw Martha and Gachagua. We can never meet, we can never talk, can't do this. This man is bad. Oh. And then suddenly, Kirinyaga happens.
The Mount Kenya handshake.
Yeah, like, so what's going on?
Well, we can't say that they have been arch rivals, like the way Martha has been rivals with William Ruto since when they were in government. I feel like the only part of rivalry was now in the 2022 election. Otherwise, Honorable Rigathi and Martha never really caught corners. They were in the political space, but they never really were battling out at the same place. The only thing that put them against each other
the debate
was 2022 and the debate. So that is a picture that is in everyone's mind. But prior to 2022, Honorable Rigathi Gachagua was never adversary for Honorable Martha Karua. So when we now see it in because everyone has a picture of 2022, and of course the debate.
The debate is never going away.
And of course the debate, then it just seems that, this is someone who she would never talk to. But did she ever say that she would never talk to Rigathi? Like, who said that she said that she'd never talk to him?
What is that? That's a comms person speaking.
No, I'm just saying she never, where has she ever said that I'll never talk to him, I'll never,
Anyway, politics should never be about enmity at the end of the day.
Exactly. We need to put the interests of the people first. And I think that's what that handshake was, whether it was a handshake or reconciliation. I think that's what it was. It wasn't we are now, it was more of like we recognize the current state of affairs. And we recognize that we were rivals in the previous general elections, but we are now leveling the playground that we are no longer rivals. You do your thing, and I'll do my thing. That's my understanding, my interpretation of what happened.
Very diplomatic. Yes. I like it that way.
But it's good for Mount Kenya politics, because for a long time, or since 2022, there's been this push and pull on who's kingpin, queenpin, and also now we have had a lot of ethnic rhetoric in regards to the mountain and the Gema people. So I think it's a good thing, at least for representation of the Gema people in terms of seeing unity, because at the end of the day, we must all live with each other, whether we are in Kenya Kwanza, we are in whatever new coalition that comes in. At the end of the day, what many of us say, and we see it online, Kenya ni home. So we must be able to put aside our personal differences for the greater good of the country. And I think that's what they both did.
That's good. Hey, that's such a well calculated answer. I love it.
You're trying to say that I'm here fixing.
No. Let me just move.
In my opinion.
But it was good.
Yeah.
It's a good. From another perspective, now that you've worked for the former president, why is it that when leaders get rejected by the people, they don't agree? This is how I'm basing this question. The other day, President Ruto went to Isiolo and the youth heckled and they were arrested and taken to court. And the charges came drunk, disorderly. Most of them are Muslims. That doesn't even make sense to me. But leave that. Even Uhuru, there are things he did and the people rejected, or he was rejected, even the BBI. But then they still want to force things on the people. Like, what's the thinking about leadership and not accepting what the people want? Because you are in that position for the people, not for personal interests. The bigger interest is the nation, not what I want.
There are multiple considerations here. First of all, the ultimate priority is that the interests of the people should always come first. And that's why the people are sovereign, and that's why power is donated. And I think in different contexts, part of what we're seeing locally, regionally, around the world is that people are increasingly recognizing their place in those dynamics, because before the feeling was that you're there to be lorded over. And so increasingly people are speaking up, people are pushing their agenda forward, and a number of things are happening here because there are the issues which are strictly legal based, and but there are also cultural issues as well. So you have a political culture of leaders who are used to, they're coming from a school of thought of this is how much power government had, and in their political and cultural formation, they came into power with that background, but the reality is really evolving. There's a book, I forget the name of the author, but it's called The End of Power, and it talks about how even increasingly in the world that we're living in, being in the executive, power is a lot more diluted than it used to be back in the day. And so there are a number of, as that power, and with the new constitution, it was deliberately diluted. We did not want a president who had so much power at the center. And that's where devolution comes in. That's where you have independent constitutional commissions. So there's this push to dilute power from the center, but at the same time there's a huge expectation still on what the center should deliver, because much as people are becoming aware of their place and role, they still have a huge expectation. Then you have these people who are around the presidency, who may not change from one presidency to the other, and who may again be used to responding to issues in a certain way. So you may even have a situation where certain decisions are being made around you, and you acquiesce. Yes, you have an awareness that these things are happening, but you're not taking enough time to find out, okay, what kind of interventions are being done. You have other considerations, such as if you have political opponents who can take advantage of you going somewhere. Like you said, that context of Isiolo is, they are Muslims, and how does drunken disorderly arise. But you'll find situations where people have been ferried with the buses and brought there deliberately. And so by the time this thing is getting reported, you might not even be aware of that fact. So there are so many moving parts. But ultimately, I think both in terms of our legal rights and in terms of our culture, there needs to be a meeting point. Our leaders need to realize that the way things were done in the old order no longer pertains. The systems of accountability, not just from outside the executive, need to be robust. So even around the presidency, there are people who may be very empowered to make certain decisions without even consulting, which end up even affecting how the presidency is perceived. And on this other side, there needs to be an awareness that can be misused by political opponents to advance certain agendas. And part of the challenge is people are impassioned, they're inflamed, they may not have a good, and that's where civic education comes in. They're misled, but they're hungry and they want that quick paycheck, but not realizing that their political rights are being misused to advance certain agendas to their detriment. Yeah. So, and I think when we're talking about these things, we need to have a very honest conversation about what's happening, because there's also quite a lot of sensationalization. And the sensationalization means that, for instance, where, for example, there are stories of disappearances that may not be real, it affects those who have actually need to be found, the resources and the efforts in finding them, right? So I think a very honest, sober conversation needs to be had about these issues.
And hopefully we can have that genuinely as Kenyans, because there is a lot of interests. Then just the other day, in January, President Trump was sworn in, and the first executive orders was to cut USAID
Funding.
and the funding and other things that were really important for, say, Africa and even Kenya as a nation. What is your feeling on that?
First of all, my feeling of President Trump's executive orders, I feel like he was just on a, it's more of a political tactic. Throw so many things at everyone that they don't have a target to hit. Because once you become president, there's an expectation of what's your first 100 days going to look like. What are you going to do immediately? So he wanted, and I think that this was deliberate, he wanted to just flood the media and flood the world with all these many different things that he's going to do, so that you don't start asking, what exactly is your agenda? Because he's just so many, because I saw a ranking of executive orders of US presidents, and he's even superseded when he was president before his executive order. So I see it more of a political tactic of, sawa, now we may not really have a exact plan, and because we don't want to be asked that question, let us just do all these executive orders, flood the media with so many targets. So now they are busy trying to, Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, Riviera in Gaza, USAID funding, so many different directions. Well, now you're busy now trying to, so we are in power. We have to now figure this out. I think that's what's happening. But when you say specifically for USAID, I was actually shocked at how much dependent not just Kenya, but Africa is on aid. And it's just so telling that our governments and as much as we have gained independence, we are not really free. Because now, because of that executive order, there's so much that has frozen in terms of health interventions, children and interventions, all the things that USAID used to do in the country. People are being laid off, or they are even unsure, am I laid off? I think there's a 90-day stay on the use of funds. It's just an awakening and realizing how Africa, we are so rich. We have the brains. Actually, most of the people working in some of the big organizations in the US, in Western countries, are from Africa. So we have great brains, we have great talent, we have great resources, but we still are shackled to aid. And I think like that is more, for me, what I feel is that it's more of a blessing than it is a disadvantage, because now it's more of like us realizing the situation that if we did not have USAID, if we did not have all this Western aid or even Eastern aid coming in, can we manage our countries? Can we feed our citizens? Can we ensure that all these institutions are moving? Because for me, I was just shocked. I was like, hala. When I was now hearing all the USAID programs now that has stopped, and people are actually now saying, oh my gosh, this now won't happen, this not that. And I'm just like, so what was the government doing?
Yeah, very good.
All these years.
Yeah. So, do you think African governments, let's not ignore Africa, we are going too far.
Yeah.
Do you think the Kenyan government is in a position to do all these things? I mean, we have a 4.3 trillion budget. Why are we not able to budget within our...
I feel like these are all issues of colonialism. And sorry to say, I know it's a bit radical, but I don't think we have really unshackled ourselves from the scramble of Africa and colonialism. And I think the idea of West, and my friends from the West may not like me for saying this, but we still remain friends. This is my opinion. But the friends for the West are in conquest for power. Right? And Africa is one of the greatest resources. I don't think actually the world would function without Africa. It's one of the greatest resources. And as much as we attained independence or fought for independence, there was a new form of colonialism that came in, is that, you know what, either keep them dependent on us. That way we can influence some decisions. And then us Africans and our governments, with all now the debt and the borrowing and the aid, we now still start thinking that, oh, these guys are giving us aid, they are our friends. But no, really, they are power conquest. They are on a mission for power and global influence. So our leaders or African governments have now, with what Trump has done and what it has uncovered, is that the underbelly of our leaders were so dependent on them that even we're not even sure they can manage. If you ask me, and I'm not even an economic expert, so this is very subjective, I honestly think Africa can fund itself. We can manage our resources, and we can actually become a global power. We just need goodwill. We need collective understanding and among all the African states that this is our agenda, that we want to be truly free when we say we are the independent states of Africa.
And that is also, my line of thought is on that. But considering now what Trump has done for now, what do you feel will be the net effect or our relationship, say, as Kenya or even as Africa with the Trump presidency?
In law, there's an area of law known as the law of obligations, and it's about what we owe to one another. So it could be contracts, or if I've wronged my fellow citizen, and as in Pelaka Kotini, within the law of obligations about what we owe to each other, there is a doctrine known as the duty of care, right? And the duty of care of one person to another. And that's why, for instance, if you're, let's say, owner, how, and this speaks to the net effect, how that aid was cancelled, in my view, whether or not it should have been cancelled, the way it was done was a bit reckless. Yeah. Because of the immediate impact it has on people. Because there's also another principle known as legitimate expectation. There are people who legitimately expected, for instance, in the coming year, that this is the kind of benefits we're going to derive, or this is the interventions that are going to be there, which impact lives, right? And you see the whole, even as and I believe, yes, we have sufficient resources if well managed to cater to our issues. But part of the whole idea underpinning something like US aid is I am my brother's keeper. That, these borders we have are, hakuna mahali utaenda other than when you go somewhere and there's a pillar saying this is such and such a border. You won't go to a border and actually cross. It's an imaginary line. She mentioned the scramble and partition for Africa. We didn't have a lot of say in determining, our borders. So there's that idea still within in terms of what we owe to each other of my brother's keeper. Granted, fine, you are well within, because Trump has been saying that's the American people's money, right? And he's well within his right as having a mandate to advance the interests of his electorate and the American people to have such a discussion and advance such an agenda. It, however, does not justify you, affecting lives in such an inconsiderate way. And that's why you'll even notice some, after he cancelled it, some of them were reversed. Certain exceptions were made for them to continue because of that very realization. And just to give another example, a real world example, for instance, ukiwa mahali and let's say you're on a bus or in a public area, alafu mtu azimie, and you then try and intervene with medical attention, and you give people the impression that you're a medical professional, but it turns out that you may not be well placed to be giving that intervention. You are liable to the extent that you prevented somebody else who may have been more capable from intervening. Yeah, so it speaks to that issue of once you start taking a certain direction, because governments are perpetual, it was still, as much as it was a different president or different presidents, it was still the American government that was backing US aid, right? So you can't then come and say that the policy shift will not take cognizance of the reality around, because people are being affected in to such a detrimental way. But on the other hand, it does force us. There's been discussion even for the last 20 years. Remember, Dambisa Moyo wrote a book that was flying off the shelves, Dead Aid. It does force us to have certain conversations, and that's where issue of public finance management now comes in. How well are we utilizing that which we have, even before we start relying on our neighbor? Because you don't start by budgeting with your neighbor's bank
money.
account.
Tutakuwa na ng'ombe, so tutakuwa na nyama.
Hapo ndio, yeah.
So that's our biggest mistake as
it's a challenge to us
across Africa. Yeah. But in line with that, across West Africa, there are guys who decided, you know what, it's enough. Like this thing of depending on the West, and then the West comes and takes our resources and goes back with them. We are done. So we had coups in Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, across several countries there, but at least those three are the most recent. And we've seen those presidents. Okay, sometimes I'm confused whether to call them presidents or just the army juntas that are leading these nations, have become so loved because the people of these countries feel they are delivering what they expect, or what a democratically elected president should have done. Key is, I'll point out Ibrahim Traore. He's become a darling across now Africa. Even when he went for the inauguration of the Ghanaian president, everyone was cheering him. You would think he's the one being sworn in.
He's like a liberator.
Yes. So what do you guys think about them? Because they even kicked away France army, the US army, closed their bases, stopped the export of minerals.
Yeah.
So what do you feel about that form of leadership?
In terms of like a benevolent dictator, Or is it that they are?
I don't think they're even dictators.
I think they are caretakers, because now the military has come in and now they are caretaker government, so they do have the mandate to make some things. Yeah. I think generally, like that wave of coups in West Africa just talks about like an Africa reawakening. There's a renaissance happening. There's something happening in Africa. Even with our protests, even you've seen in Mozambique, there's something happening. There's an awakening happening that is causing us to actually have a conversation on how do we govern ourselves? Who are really our friends? Whether it's within our borders or outside our borders. And I think that's what really happened, or that wave that we saw in West Africa. And I think also we are experiencing that wave in different ways. It's not the military taking over our caretaker government, but we're actually seeing those waves because these are the conversations now that many more African countries and citizens are having. How I feel about Ibrahim Traore, he's done a good thing for his people if his people are happy. He's done a good thing because he's done a good thing if his people are happy, because that's the whole point of leadership, is that you put the interests of your people first. So if he, in his view, felt like France and all these Western nations were oppressing his people or trying to influence in places in a way that his the agenda or the interests of our people were not being met, then 100% he is the type of leader that that the people would want and love, because that is the idea of servant leadership, or like leadership that leads a country. So I'm now getting to the point of there's a book also Dambisa wrote called The Edge of Chaos. And she just talks about this ideology of democracy. Does it really work? Does it really work in Africa? And I think now what is happening is that we are being forced to rethink how we govern ourselves and their ideologies. And I think just as a human race in total, we've gotten to a point of such great technological advances in how we live our lives. It affected how we think. It's affected how we speak to each other. It's affected how we run our businesses. So of course it would affect how governments are run. So I think we'll actually see more and more shifts in Africa, maybe not coups, but certain shifts that ideally in the past were not seen as this could possibly happen. And they may be welcomed, they may be not. But for Ibrahim Traore, if his people love him, then he's on. It's the same thing also as, I don't want to. It's the same thing that, hey, no, let me not go there. You saw where I was going. Yeah, I think he's doing a good thing. I honestly think, I haven't been paying attention on West African, but I think he's doing a good thing. And let me not call it benevolent dictator. Let me just say a caretaker government has come in. And it's kind of what, by the way, Kenyans were pushing for on June 25th, a caretaker government.
Yeah. Your thoughts on that?
I think let me start with the classical question of, does the end justify the means? Because I think a big part of the attraction is the ends that are realized that make this means of
Attractive,
government appealing and attractive. And why we are then inclined to romanticize it. For instance, I get very excited of the Thomas Sankara comparison because I'm a big fan of Thomas Sankara and other leaders like him. But I think, as with all other things, politics is a delicate balancing act because, as we were discussing earlier, you are really then dependent on the goodwill of the leadership of this military regime, because if they are not then aligned with the people's interests, the people who are sovereign, then where does the accountability enter? And that's the whole idea of participatory government. And there are very robust discussions happening about our understanding of democracy, as she said. And one of the most interesting thoughts I've heard on that is from former President Olusegun Obasanjo, when he also said that Western-style democracy is not suited for Africa, because looking at, for example, Kenya's history, adopting what the colonial government gave to us, and some of it still remains to an extent. But looking at the British Empire, they had a monarchy and a parliament where even the opposition was Her Majesty's loyal opposition. But now when you look at that underlying architecture being the model that we are basing our participatory democracy on, even though it's evolved a lot and our constitution has included quite a number of that whole idea of the other side of the aisle then becomes, and you'll see that for instance, because what we're seeing in West Africa is not the first time we're seeing it. It's exciting right now, but remember that that's how President Museveni, for instance, came to power. And he was very popular, darling, coming out from the Luwero Triangle in the jungle and coming, and he was a star. Some he still is. You have across the border his friend, President Kagame. That's how they came into power,
the people of those countries love them.
And so there's a saying that I like, that every revolution in time wears the robes of the tyrant it has deposed. So it's very appealing right now, but even in that sense of a caretaker, how do you anticipate that transition? Because one of the things that's said in political science and history is that when armies leave the barracks, it's very difficult
hard
for them to go back in. So it's very slippery territory. But in terms of the ends it realizes, pushing away still, because remember, the primary obligation of the military is to defend the populace, the sovereign people, from external enemies, and sometimes even enemies within, but primarily from external enemies. And that's why we can then have applause for them pushing the French away in terms of some of the oppressive policies that they had. Now that's in terms of external, because it's still an existential threat. They may not be coming with guns and the like, but but right now, it's their policies that were detrimental. For instance, their financial systems being so interlinked. It's a different kind of violence. It's economic violence. So I think there are a number, but you've also had instances where there's been successful transitions from military regimes. You can see, President Jerry Rawlings. He successfully transitioned to a democracy. So you still see that there was a recognition that participatory government was still vital for a healthy
nation.
nation.
And I think even they've given timelines. Even for Traore, I think they said it was supposed to be 2 years, but I think now they gave him, like they had a committee and they agreed, okay, go for 5 years, then we can have elections. For Niger, I think I saw last week that it's supposed to be after 2 years. No, that's what I'm saying. At least they've had, they're making progress. So we just hope.
And that's in line with what Chaka is saying. Absolute power corrupts. So if there are no checks and balances, and I'm happy to hear that they're
But
actually...
we have checks and balances in Kenya and
Yeah, it's true.
other countries for that matter.
It's true, but in terms of that, in terms of a caretaker government, if there's no really timeline in how long you're caretaking for an election, then that's where now power corrupts. Because when you realize you're the center of all this, you're human and you have your own human interests, and that can easily now become at the forefront of why you want to retain power. And that is something now we've seen with our neighbor Uganda. When Yoweri Museveni came in, he was coming in and wow, the people loved him. But now when you down the line, it's a different story, because now the power has corrupted him, and maybe for him he thinks, and I'm speaking from a very subjective.
Yes, you're just looking as a
subjective. I'm not. Yes, I'm not in Uganda. I don't know the affairs.
Yeah.
It's just from looking in and looking in and from the outside, and just the kind of little information, because you never really know the nitty-gritties until you're there. He seems that maybe for him, he thinks he's the best person to rule Uganda, and no one else at the moment shows like a person that I can say, okay, yeah, I'm tired, right? But it's absolute power. It's absolute power in how it corrupts, and it can easily corrupt. And that's why it's important to have checks and balances. And even in our Kenyan case, that's why it's very unfortunate that we keep blurring this line of the checks and balances in our constitution, because they protect not just the leaders, but also the populace, to ensure that we have that form of participatory governance, whether we'll continue calling it democracy but for sure, we're not saying that we want to go into totalitarianism, but we are going to now redefine the kind of democracy that will benefit our context, our cultures, the diversity that's in our countries, because every country has its diversity. Yeah.
And you see that actually point of redefining democracy, and it's a continual process.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at, we say, yes, 15 years is quite some time since we got the 2010 Constitution. But in the context of our history, it's a very short time, right? Our history, even pre-independence, it's a very, very short time. But you keep having stress testing these models that you have to see whether they are well suited for the people within a certain context, and that context includes the things peculiar to our nations and the things peculiar to that time in the country. And so even going back to the discussion on having a military, in certain respects, when certain roles are very well defined, you can have hybrid elements, because at the end of the day, for instance, those militaries are very well equipped. They have brilliant citizens, because they're still citizens who love their country. You have engineers, doctors, and they are recognized often for their very high efficiency. And that's why, for instance, you saw President Uhuru relying on them in his second term, and he was able to catalyze quite a few things.
Start that discussion.
Sorry? No, but it's a fact.
No, he did. Yeah. But there are, again, legal questions to it.
No, but you see, that's now where, for instance, legal questions, it's very easy to talk about it in the context of another nation, because was a coup legal? Yeah, why have they been banned, for instance, from voting in the AUC?
Because
so
we are tied
why?
to what the West defined as democracy, in my opinion.
And some of those conversations is where now I'm saying, when you have those roles well defined, yeah, you can advance certain interests. Because part of the reason I was saying it's very attractive is because we're looking at it in terms of the results, but in our local context, we criticize it in terms of the process. Yeah.
Different countries, different cultures. Hey, I think we can keep talking and going. So I think it's best for today. We will have to end it at this, then we can have another session, because clearly there's a lot and it's very engaging. So guys, thank you for coming through. I hope you enjoyed yourselves.
Yes, we did, and learned also new perspectives. It was good.
Swali zingine ngumu, lakini
Sana. Sana.
Lazima, you know. Yeah, so thank you very much for you who stuck through to watch this to the end. I hope you also learned a lot from political communication, strat communications to legal perspectives, strat communication, task forces, and all that. Yeah, so now you have a better understanding. Thanks for watching Fanya Mambo today. By the way, if you've not subscribed by now, I don't know what you're waiting for. You will miss a lot. So please do subscribe, and we will catch you on the next episodes.